Hi there! Welcome to the 27th episode of the Synth project, where we are going to build a synth together. Today's subject is a new module that is not used at all to generate or modify sounds, but it is still very useful in a classic analog synth. In fact, we could see this module present on the right side of the top shelf in a number of versions of the Classic Moog synthesizer. I am talking about an oscilloscope, useful to display the shape of the waves, while we set up the instrument by patching it and modifying the various parameters. I have added in the description below links to some vintage pictures showing a CRT oscilloscope in the rack, and I hope you'll enjoy them. Of course, our oscilloscope will not be equipped with a CRT like in those vintage instruments. Instead, we will use a more modern version using an LCD display, and the oscilloscope will be created around a DSP, a digital signal processor. But don't be scared. I know building such a device using a microcontroller and programming it may seem daunting to some of you, but I have found a kit sold online that is available also pre-built and pre-tuned, and for only $30. Before diving into the subject, please take a moment to subscribe and to click on the bell to activate the notifications if you haven't done so already. This way you will not miss any of the future episodes of this and other fun and interesting series on this channel. And now let's begin! I have found a pre-built and low-cost version of this oscilloscope on Amazon, and I have added this link to the description below for your convenience. But if you look around on the internet, you will definitively find other distributors and also non-assembled version of the kit that will make you spend some fun time building the device by yourself. This particular device is called DSO138, capable of a rate of 1 million samples per second and therefore particularly suited for audio applications. It has a TFT display of 2.4 inches, enough to clearly see the wave shapes produced by the synthesizer. This version is sold along with a transparent acrylic case. As such, you could use it as a low-cost workbench oscilloscope if you don't have one, and it is more than enough to help with the tuning of all the synth modules presented so far. Among other capabilities, this device is capable of displaying on the screen simultaneously both the waveforms and significant measurements on it, along with information on the current oscilloscope settings. The accuracy of this oscilloscope is of 12 bits, which means that it can recognize up to 4 million levels of the signal, quite good for audio usage, and in fact it has a bandwidth of 200 kHz, suitable to display fine details of waves up to 10-20 kHz. This oscilloscope has also a minimum sensitivity of 10 mV and an input impedance of 1 meg, comparable to more costly devices, and like more costly devices, can be directly coupled with the devices under test, or it can be AC decoupled. A ground input setting can also be used for the auto-calibration of the device. The time base is consistent with the available bandwidth, and here is a description of the acrylic case, and here are the only available instructions to actually build the case. They do not provide any other assembly manual for the case. The oscilloscope comes in two little packages. One contains the actual oscilloscope board, a small user manual, and a cable to apply the signal under test to the oscilloscope input. This cable has just one BNC connector on one side and a couple of alligator clips on the other. If you wanted an actual probe, you will have to buy one of your own, but to use this device as a synth module, we won't even need that, so don't worry about it. Here is a package with 4 pins, which could probably be used on the PCB to raise it from the workbench if you don't use the acrylic case. The second package contains the components to build the case, and there is yet another little package inside containing the hardware for the assembly, and each acrylic sheet comes protected with some paper that we need to remove before putting everything together. Since there are no assembly instructions for the case, and the few pictures on the Amazon site don't help much, I will have to figure out by myself how to mount the case. These are the instructions on how to use the oscilloscope. Again, these are very basic and barely describe how each push button and each switch are for. It could have been done better, actually. On the other side of the paper there is the schematic, which let me think that this is open source hardware. However, I don't see anywhere an indication on where to find the firmware that needs to be burned on the device itself. Well, I don't really care, I bought it pre-mounted just to avoid the need of installing the software and tuning the device. This other sheet seems to have the instructions to tune the oscilloscope if needed, while the other side has the instructions to assemble the oscilloscope itself, in case you get the version that needs to be put together. Here I have printed the pictures representing the instructions to put the case together. I have just taken this from the Amazon page, and even if you search the internet you won't find a better manual. There are also YouTube videos describing how to assemble this case, but there are differences on how they do it, from one video to another. So I guess most is left to the intuition of the people, since there is no good assembly manual from the manufacturer. This means that I too will have to rely on my own intuition, and so I will describe all the steps I followed. If any of you comes around with a better way to build the case, please share it in the comments. First thing to do is to remove all the paper from the acrylic sheets. This is the part that I hate the most. I had to do it in the past for other devices I bought, and it is always difficult to detach the first corner of paper from each acrylic piece. Let me pause the video until I am done, and I will be back soon, hopefully. Okay, I was finally able to clean all the pieces, and I had also to clean some other acrylic piece used to make some extensions for the push buttons and the switches. These were made out of red acrylic sheet rather than the transparent one. You can see a couple of them in the upper center of this video frame. To continue, we now have to detach the screen from the PCB because there is an acrylic sheet that goes just in between. Now we can take the base of the case, which is symmetrical and can be put at the bottom on either of its two sides. There are 4 long screws in the package, so I am assuming these have to go to the 4 corners of the base, and all the other pieces will fit on them, so we can hold everything in place once we put the corresponding nuts on the top. Next, according to the very detailed assembly description, we need to add on top another acrylic sheet, which will act as a spacer, I believe. According to the holes, it seems to be going this way. And now it is the turn of the PCB, which also needs to be slidden into those 4 screws. Maybe not. From the picture, which is not very detailed by the way, it seems the 4 screws are held on the back of the panel with nuts. So let me remove the PCB and the spacers, and let me add the nuts first. And now I am going to tighten them up, not too much of course, to avoid breaking the acrylic sheet. Now I should be able to add the spacer and the PCB, like this. And now again, it looks like more nuts are needed to keep in place the PCB. And of course, they also need to be tightened. Now, according to the pictures, we need to add another sheet, but I'm not so sure which one goes first. Intuitively, it seems this one goes first, but it doesn't look like it is flat with the PCB. Let's try with the other one then. No, that doesn't really fit either. Okay, I think I got it. You see, this piece here has holes to fit screws for holding the display. So let's prepare this piece first, for which I think I have to use a smaller set of screws. These screws first, then the one on the opposite corner, and now the last 2 of them on the remaining corners. One here, and one on the last corner. Okay, now I can put the whole thing on the pile. And I think I will also need to add the push buttons and switch extensions underneath. And now I need to put everything together, which I don't see to be an easy task. Yeah, exactly. One more try. Okay, now the switches are in place, but not the buttons. You know, this is the most difficult part, not the one of removing the protective paper from the sheets. Something looks wrong here. Let me see. Let's try putting this one here first. And now we add the red pieces. And finally we cover everything with this last piece. However, before that we have to add the sides, otherwise we won't be able to do it later. Yeah, well, I need to lose this nut, otherwise the side panel will not fit. Now I can tighten the nut back. And now I can add the other side panels, making sure their holes align with the components on the PCB. Putting back the red extensions. And the long sides need to go toward the inside to be able to reach the push buttons. And finally the cover. Oh, don't forget to remove the protection from the display. Okay, now it seems to be fine. The button and the switches are working fine, and so it is time to fix everything in place with the remaining nuts. Tightening the nuts. Some of the buttons don't work anymore. I think it is too tight, so I will release a little bit the pressure and tightening a little the nuts. Okay, now all is fine, although the reset button has still some issues. I think the nut close to that must be untightened even more. But, you know, at the end I don't care that much, because I am not going to use this device as a standalone. I will leave it right now this way to run some tests, but at the end the oscilloscope will have a new case when it will be used as a module of the synth, and I'll make sure that my case will work better than this one. Now that the oscilloscope is safe inside its box, it is time to run some tests to verify whether it is worth using this device for the synth or not. For this device to be used on the synth, it must be capable of displaying unchanged the wave signals at its input, in a range of frequencies from a few Hz to at least 5 kHz. Then it must consume just a little power, so that it will leave enough power available for the power rails, so they can be used for a number of other modules. And last, of course, it must be easy to use. To run these tests, I will connect the oscilloscope input to my function generator, which will provide reliable signals to it. The information provided on the oscilloscope display, both in numerical and graphical formats, will be compared to what the generator is providing. For what concerns the power supply, I see that the user manual states that the oscilloscope is best powered with a voltage of 9 volts and the maximum current at that voltage will be around 120 mA. Since I don't have a 9 volts power supply on the synth, I will have to use the plus 12 volts rail and lower the voltage with a dedicated regulator installed within the oscilloscope module itself. All in all, I don't expect to see too much variation from these specs, and so I will assume that the oscilloscope is going to use about 10% of the whole available power on the top rail. It should therefore be possible to add to the same shelf a number of low-power modules to fill it all, and so, from the perspective of the power supply at least, we can definitively say that the oscilloscope satisfies our needs. That said, let's now test it with the function generator. I attached to the oscilloscope a 9 volts power supply, the same type that can be used to power an Arduino Uno. I also attached to the input socket the cable that comes with the oscilloscope, and connected the other end of the cable to the function generator. Let's now turn on the power. And here is the wave produced by the generator. Let's see if we can scale horizontally the picture to have a better look at the period's shape. To do so, we need to push the selection button on the bottom right corner, and we push it a number of times until the time-base scale is selected. At this point, we can change the scale by pushing the plus and minus buttons, like this. And here is the representation of the sine wave currently emitted by the generator. It looks very good, but let's make some changes to see if the oscilloscope keeps behaving correctly. I'm now decreasing the frequency. It seems to work fine. Changing also the scale. Good so far. And now, if we push the top button for a few seconds, we should see the text information appear on the display. Here, like that, the frequency is right, 4 kHz. The voltage does not seem right, and that's because the oscilloscope thinks there is a ×10 probe. So let me change these settings. And yes, now the oscilloscope reports the correct peak voltage, both the positive and the negative, and the measure is about 5 volts peak to peak, which is what the generator is currently producing. Let's change again the time scale. Changing now the frequency. Now I am at 500 Hz. Now is 100 Hz. Let's go down a little more. Now it is 50 Hz. It seems like it has some difficulty with the synchronization of the image. So let me try change the trigger from auto to normal and let's see if that makes a difference. And it still has some sort of problem. Let's try now with a single shot. In this case the oscilloscope is catching the first period and then it stops. And if we push again the OK button, it should take another sample, and then another and another. But it looks like things are not doing always that well. So let's go back to auto. And now the wave is clearly visible, even though it skips every now and then. Let's reduce the frequency now. Now I am at 30 Hz. Let me adjust again the time base. And it seems like I can adjust it pretty well, and the oscilloscope still shows a nice shape. Reducing the frequency even more to test the lower part of the bandwidth. So now I am at 10 Hz. And I can still adjust the scale to see a good number of wave periods. Now I am at 5 Hz. Adjusting the scale. Now 0.1 Hz, and it still works decently. Let's now take a look at the square wave, which is also more significant to check the distortion in the oscilloscope. Removing also the text data, and the wave looks pretty nice on the display. Let's now try with the triangular wave. And that one looks pretty good too. Let's now go up with the frequency. This is now 1 Hz. Change the time base. Moving to 10 Hz and readjusting the time scale. Good. Going to 100 Hz. And it is perfect. And now let's try with the square wave. Good. And the sine wave. Very good. Moving now to 1 kHz. Adjusting the scale. The sine wave looks beautiful. Changing to the triangular wave. And the square wave. I can see now a little imperfection which could probably be fixed by adjusting the variable capacitors visible on the left side of the display. Let's go now to 10 kHz. Okay, now we can see that the oscilloscope is losing some of the high-frequency harmonics. But I guess it is still fine from the perspective of using the oscilloscope for the synth, since we really will not use such high frequencies when making sounds. Let's go to 20 kHz just for the sake of it. Yeah, now the shape is totally distorted, so the oscilloscope is no good at such frequencies, when displaying wave different than sine waves. So back to 10 kHz. And let's take a look at the triangular frequency. Yeah, it is clear that this one too suffers from loss of high-frequency harmonics. We can see that from the shape of the peaks. Moving to the sine wave. And that, as expected, shows just fine since it does not have any harmonics. And in fact, even if I go high with the frequency, everything is fine. Good at 20 kHz, and good also at 50 kHz, although it has lost some amplitude. Overall, considering that we are not really going to display frequencies higher than 5-6 kHz, we can safely use this oscilloscope as a module for the synth. What it needs now is a new case in the same overall shape as the other modules already made for the synth. I decided to add such a module to the rack because I believe it will end up being very useful, not just for the possibility to review particular shapes created with the synth, but also to retune every now and then some modules that may need it. And besides, how cool it is to have a synthesizer that shows the sounds that it's actually producing. I will dedicate the next episode to the assembly of the oscilloscope module itself and its installation in the rack. I will also spend some time reviewing with you the kind of shapes generated with the synth and how the sound effects change with the change of such shapes. We are going to have a lot of fun, and while looking forward for that video, I leave you with my usual happy experiments.